Have you ever wondered what truly creates a prodigy? Is it a hidden spark, born in the blood, or a skill, meticulously carved? Most believe it is destiny. But in a small New England cottage, a retired single dad is about to discover a different truth, that a world-class genius can be forged from the most unlikely tragedy. Stay with us for this extraordinary journey into the heart of a young musical genius. Please subscribe to support our channel, and if you are already a member of our community, we would love to see your thoughts in the comments below. Chapter 1. Peaceful Melodies in a Small Town. The golden sun of a late October afternoon filtered through the maple trees of Willow Creek. In this corner of New England, the air always smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Thomas sat on his front porch, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. He watched the dry leaves dance across the wooden planks. Thomas was a man of quiet habits, a retired widower with silver hair and eyes that had seen many seasons. He lived in a small, white-shingled cottage that had stood against the Atlantic winds for decades. His life was comfortable. With a steady pension and years of careful savings, he did not worry about the price of bread or the rising cost of heating oil. His wealth was not in gold, but in peace. Inside the house, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock was the only sound. Then a soft melody began to drift from the living room. It was Emily, his 16-year-old daughter, practicing on the old upright piano. Thomas closed his eyes and smiled. Raising Emily alone had been his greatest mission. He had taught her to be strong yet gentle, to be independent yet kind. The gate at the end of the driveway creaked. Thomas did not need to look up to know who it was. The footsteps were light but hesitant. It was Lily. She was Emily's best friend, but to Thomas she felt like a second daughter. Lily arrived with her head bowed and her shoulders slumped. Her clothes were clean but thin, barely enough to keep out the New England chill. She did not go to her own house after school. She came here. She came to the house where the lights were always on. "Hello, Lily," Thomas said softly as she reached the porch. The young girl looked up. Her eyes were tired. They were the eyes of someone who had learned to hide her tears before she learned to ride a bike. In her own home, Lily lived in the shadow of neglect. Her parents were lost in the bottom of a bottle. The smell of stale beer and the sound of angry shouting were the only things waiting for her there. "Hi, Mr. Thomas," she whispered. "Is it okay if I stay for dinner?" Thomas stood up and opened the door wide. "Lily, you never have to ask. This is your home, too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. He placed it in her palm. "I had this made for you," he said. "If the world ever gets too loud or if your own house feels too cold, you come here. You don't wait on the porch. You just walk in." Lily stared at the key. Her fingers trembled as she gripped it. For a moment she could not speak. A single tear escaped and hit the wooden floor. Thomas did not make a scene. He simply patted her shoulder and led her inside toward the warmth of the kitchen. The evening was filled with the smell of roasting chicken and herbs. Thomas moved around the kitchen with a calm grace. He liked the sound of the girls laughing in the next room. Emily was showing Lily a new song. The piano notes felt like a heartbeat for the house. Dinner was served on the heavy oak table. There were no phones, no distractions, just the clinking of silverware and the steady flow of conversation. Thomas watched Lily eat. She ate quickly at first, like someone who was not sure when the next warm meal would come. "Slow down, child," Thomas teased gently. "The pot is full and the night is young." He used these moments to teach them, not with long lectures, but with stories. He talked about the beauty of the changing seasons. He spoke about the strength of the oak tree which grows stronger with every storm it survives. "Life will not always be easy," Thomas said, his voice deep and steady. "But remember, grace is not about avoiding the rain. It is about how you walk through it. You must be resilient. You must be kind, especially when the world is not." Lily listened to him like a traveler listening to a map. To her, Thomas was more than a friend's father. He was a lighthouse, a fixed point in a world that felt like shifting sand. After the dishes were washed, the house grew quiet again. Lily sat by the fireplace, her feet tucked under her. The warmth of the hearth turned her pale cheeks pink. For the first time that day, the tension left her face. She looked like a child again. Thomas sat in his armchair reading a book, but his mind was on the girls. He knew Lily's situation was getting worse. He saw the bruises on her spirit, even when there were none on her skin. He had decided long ago that he would be her protector. He did not do it for praise. He did not do it for a reward. He did it because it was right. The night deepened. The wind began to howl around the eaves of the cottage, but inside it was safe. The fire crackled. The scent of vanilla candles filled the air. Thomas looked at the two girls sitting on the rug. They were whispering about their dreams for the future, college, the city, music. Their voices were full of hope. Thomas felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had created a sanctuary, a place where a neglected girl could breathe, a place where his own daughter could learn the true meaning of family. He did not know that a storm was coming, one that would test every word he had ever spoken about resilience. He did not know that his life was about to be tied to a secret that would change everything. For now, there was only the peace of the small town. There was the warmth of the fire. And there was the quiet promise of the brass key in Lily's pocket. Thomas leaned back and closed his eyes. He thanked the heavens for the quiet life he had built. He felt ready for whatever the future held, or so he thought. The piano stood silent in the corner, waiting for the next song. The fire burned down to glowing embers. In the heart of Willow Creek, the little white cottage remained a beacon of light, safe, warm, and full of love. Chapter 2. A Life-Changing Decision. The winter air had turned sharp and unforgiving. Frost clung to the edges of the window panes in the little white cottage. Inside, the warmth of the hearth usually brought comfort, but tonight the air felt heavy. Lily sat at the kitchen table. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of tea, but she wasn't drinking. She was shaking. Her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying in the shadows. Emily sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Thomas stood by the stove, his back turned to them. He watched the steam rise from the kettle. He had lived many years, and he knew the silence of a life-altering moment. Finally, Lily spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I have nowhere to go, Mr. Thomas." She had told them the truth, a secret that had been growing inside her for weeks. Lily was 17, and she was pregnant. A series of mistakes born from a desperate search for love in the wrong places had led to this. She didn't know who the father was. She only knew that her world had stopped spinning. Thomas turned around slowly. His face was calm, but his heart was heavy with sorrow for this child. "What did your parents say?" Lily let out a ragged sob. "They told me to get out. My father, he said I was a disgrace to his name. My mother just watched. She didn't even say goodbye. They had disowned her. The people who should have been her shield had become her greatest storm. She was homeless, she was alone, and she was carrying a life she was not prepared to protect." Thomas looked at his own daughter, Emily. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else, pity, and a silent plea. The room grew silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the eaves. Thomas looked out the window at the dark, frozen garden. He was a man who had earned his rest. His bank account was healthy, and his days were meant for books and gardening. He had finished his job of raising a child. Now a heavy choice lay on the table. If he stepped back, Lily would fall. The state would take her. The baby would be born into a system that rarely offered warmth. But if he stepped forward, his quiet retirement would vanish. The peace he had cultivated would be replaced by crying nights and legal battles. His reputation in the small town would be tested. Thomas walked over to the table and pulled out a chair. He sat down, and looked Lily directly in the eyes. "Lily, look at me." She looked up, her face wet with tears. "You are not going to a shelter, and you're not going to the streets. This house has plenty of room." Lily blinked in disbelief. "But Mr. Thomas, it's not your problem. You've done so much for me already." Thomas leaned forward. His voice was steady like an anchor in a rough sea. "Kindness is not a ledger, Lily. I don't keep track of what I've done. I only see what needs to be done." He took a deep breath. "I will become your legal guardian. And when that baby comes, I will sign the papers. I will be the father on the record. This child will have a name. This child will have a home. And most importantly, this child will have a family." Lily fell forward, burying her face in her arms on the table. She wept with a sound that tore at the heart. It was the sound of a drowning person finally finding a piece of wood to hold on to. Emily looked at her father. "Are you sure, Dad?" she asked softly. "Everything will change." Thomas nodded. "I know, Emily. But we don't choose the timing of our challenges. We only choose our character when they arrive." The following weeks were a blur of cold mornings and sterile offices. Thomas sat in wood-paneled rooms with lawyers and social workers. He felt their judging eyes. An older man retired, taking in a pregnant teenager who wasn't his kin. They looked for a hidden motive. They looked for a catch. But Thomas was a pillar of the community. His record was spotless. His finances were transparent. He signed the documents with a firm hand. He committed his life and his savings to a future he hadn't asked for. The whispers began at the local grocery store. They started at the post office and moved through the pews of the church. "Did you hear about Thomas? People like to talk when they don't understand." They wondered why a man of his age would invite such a mess into his home. Thomas heard the murmurs. He saw the way some neighbors turned their heads when he walked by. He didn't care. He chose silence as his armor. He knew that defending his reputation would only bring more attention to Lily. Her dignity was worth more than his social standing. Back at the cottage, the transformation began. The guest room upstairs was cleared out. Thomas went to the attic and pulled out an old wooden crib. It had been Emily's once. He spent his afternoon sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. He repainted it a soft, creamy white. He used his savings to buy the things a baby needs: small blankets, tiny clothes that looked like doll's garments, a rocking chair that creaked in a comforting rhythm. Emily helped him decorate. She hung little stars from the ceiling. She and Lily sat on the floor folding clothes and talking about names. The laughter was returning to the house, though it was a quieter, more cautious kind of joy. Thomas watched them from the doorway. He felt the weight of the responsibility. He was no longer just a man waiting for the sunset. He was a man preparing for a new dawn. His retirement was no longer about his own comfort. It was about building a fortress for two souls who had been abandoned. He looked at the legal papers sitting on his desk. His name was there: Thomas, guardian, protector. He wasn't doing this because he was lonely. He wasn't doing this to feel young again. He was doing it because he believed that a life without service was a life half-lived. The winter grew deeper. The snow piled high against the cottage walls. But the nursery was ready. The crib was waiting. And for the first time in months, Lily slept through the night without waking up in terror. Thomas sat by the fire late one evening. He looked at his hands calloused from working on the crib. He felt a strange, deep sense of purpose. His life had changed forever. The quiet New England cottage would soon be filled with the cries of a newborn. The peace of his old life was gone. But a new kind of peace had taken its place, the peace of a clear conscience, the peace of a man who had looked at a storm and said, "Not today." He closed his eyes and listened to the wind. He was ready. Chapter 3. Nurturing a Free Soul. The seasons in Willow Creek followed a familiar rhythm. The vibrant greens of spring turned into the heavy heat of summer. Then came the crisp gold of autumn, and finally the long white silence of winter. In the small cottage, the passing of time was measured by more than the weather. It was measured by the height of a small boy named Leo, by the fading echoes of laughter as the house grew smaller for some and larger for others. The day finally came when the house felt hollow for a moment. Emily and Lily had finished their schooling and were ready to face the world. There were suitcases by the door. There were promises to call every weekend. Emily was heading to the city for her first career step. Lily, now a confident young woman, was moving to follow her own path. Thomas stood on the porch holding a 5-year-old Leo by the hand. He watched the car pull away. He waved until the red taillights disappeared around the bend. The house was quiet now, just the old man and the young boy. Thomas looked down at Leo. The boy had dark, curious eyes and a spirit that seemed to vibrate with energy. Thomas didn't see a burden. He didn't see a duty. He saw a miracle that had fallen into his lap. Their days became a beautiful, slow dance. Thomas, who had once worried about the stillness of retirement, found himself busier than ever. He learned the art of making the perfect peanut butter sandwich. He spent his mornings in the backyard showing Leo how to plant seeds. He cheered from the sidelines during games of tag. Thomas did it all with a heart full of gratitude. He never looked at Leo as an insurance policy for his sunset years. He never thought to himself, "This boy will take care of me when I am weak." No. Thomas had his savings and his health. He wanted nothing from Leo but his happiness. He raised the boy with the mindset of a gardener. A gardener does not own the flower. He only provides the soil and the water so the flower can bloom and face the sun. Thomas wanted Leo to be free. He wanted him to fly. One rainy afternoon, the house was filled with the gray light of a storm. Thomas was reading in his armchair. Leo wandered over to the old upright piano in the corner. The boy reached up and pressed a single key. The note hung in the air, clear and pure. Leo didn't bang on the keys like most children his age. He listened. He pressed another note, and another. He began to find a melody, something simple and haunting. Thomas lowered his book. He felt a shiver run down his spine, the way the boy's small fingers moved. It wasn't random, it was intentional, Leo Thomas whispered. "Do you like the music?" The boy turned around, his eyes shining. "It sounds like the rain, Grandpa Thomas," he said. Thomas didn't hesitate. He sat on the bench beside the boy. He showed him where middle C lived. He showed him the difference between a major and a minor chord. Leo soaked it up like parched earth. From that day on, the house was never silent again. Thomas dipped into his savings without a second thought. He bought stacks of sheet music. He hired a professional tutor from the city to visit once a week. Some neighbors whispered that he was spending too much. They said he should be saving that money for his own medical bills later in life. Thomas only smiled. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't spending money. He was investing in a soul. Seeing Leo's face light up when he mastered a difficult piece was better than any bank balance. It was Thomas's greatest contribution to the world. Leo grew, and so did his talent. By the time he was 5, he was playing pieces that made the tutor shake his head in disbelief. The boy was a prodigy, but to Thomas, he was just Leo, the boy who liked extra syrup on his pancakes, the boy who still needed a hug after a bad dream. Every evening, Thomas would sit by the fireplace and listen to Leo practice. The music would fill the cottage, spilling out into the cold New England night. It brought a renewed sense of purpose to Thomas's life. He felt younger. He felt vital. Not because he was being taken care of, but because he was still giving. He often sat on the porch while Leo played inside. He would look at the stars and think about Lily and Emily. They were doing well. They were successful. But here in this house, a new light was burning. Thomas made sure Leo knew the world was big. He told him stories of great composers who traveled across oceans. He wanted Leo to know that one day he might leave Willow Creek too, and Thomas was okay with that. He was more than okay. I am the wind beneath your wings, little bird, Thomas thought. I am not the cage. Leo's music became the heartbeat of the town. Sometimes people would walk their dogs past the cottage just to hear the melody. They marveled at the old man and the boy. They saw a bond that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. Thomas watched the boy's hands fly across the keys. He saw the concentration on his young face. In those moments, Thomas felt a profound peace. He had taken a situation born of tragedy and neglect, and he had turned it into art. He didn't need a safety net. He didn't need a foul. The joy of the present moment was enough. The sound of a well-played C major chord was enough. As the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across the piano, Thomas felt a deep sense of pride. His life was a legacy of kindness, and Leo was the living proof. The boy finished his song and turned to Thomas. "Did you like that one?" Grandpa Thomas nodded, his eyes misting over. "It was perfect, Leo. Just perfect." They sat together in the fading light, the old man and the future maestro, two souls bound by a promise made on a cold winter night years ago, a promise that had blossomed into a symphony of love. Chapter 4. The Storm from the Past. The morning began like any other in Willow Creek. The dew sat heavy on the clover. Thomas stood in the kitchen carefully slicing strawberries for Leo's oatmeal. From the living room, the gentle scales of a Mozart sonata drifted through the air. Leo was already at the piano. His small fingers moved with a grace that still felt like a miracle to Thomas. Then came a sound that did not belong. A heavy car door slammed shut near the gate. It was not the sound of a neighbor's rusty truck. It was the solid, expensive thud of luxury. Thomas wiped his hands on his apron and walked to the window. A sleek black sedan sat idling at the curb. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out. He held a leather briefcase like a weapon. He looked at the small white cottage with a cold, calculating gaze. Thomas felt a sudden sharp chill. It was the kind of feeling a bird has when the shadow of a hawk passes over the nest. When the doorbell rang, Thomas opened it slowly. The man handed him a business card with a golden crest. "My name is Marcus Sterling," the man said. His voice was as polished as his shoes. "I represent the Sterling Agricultural Group from the city." Thomas frowned. "I don't need any farm equipment, Mr. Sterling." The lawyer did not smile. "I am not here to sell you anything, Mr. Thomas. I am here regarding the estate of Julian Sterling, and specifically regarding the boy playing the piano in the other room." The music stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas felt the world tilt on its axis. He led the man into his small study, far from Leo's curious ears. The lawyer laid out a file on the mahogany desk. Julian Sterling was the only heir to a billion-dollar farming empire, Sterling explained. He passed away recently in a tragic accident. But before he died, he left a confession, a letter. He spoke of a summer spent in this town. He spoke of a girl named Lily. And he spoke of a child he believed he had left behind. Thomas gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. "Julian," he whispered. The name finally had a face. The mistake from Lily's past was no longer a shadow. He was a Sterling. "We are requesting an immediate DNA test," the lawyer continued. "The Sterling family is a vast corporate entity. They require an heir. If this boy is Julian's son, he is the sole successor to one of the largest fortunes in the country." Thomas felt a wave of nausea. Successor heir to Thomas Leo was just the boy who liked to feed the ducks. To this man, Leo was a missing piece of a corporate puzzle. After the lawyer left, Thomas sat in the dark for a long time. The strawberries on the counter turned soft and bruised. The oatmeal grew cold. That night Thomas did not sleep. He sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace, watching the embers die out. He looked at the framed photos on the mantel. Leo at the beach. Leo's first piano recital. Leo sleeping with his head on Thomas's lap. Leo was his Doping. The boy was the reason Thomas woke up with a smile. The boy was the reason Thomas felt the blood pumping through his veins. Without Leo, the cottage would just be a hollow box of wood and stone. The silence would be unbearable. A selfish voice whispered in his ear, "Hide him. Tell them Lily moved away. Protect your happiness." But then Thomas thought of Leo's future. He looked at the boy's talent. As a sterling Leo would have the world, the finest conservatories in Europe, the best pianos ever made, a life where he would never have to worry about a pension or a medical bill. Thomas walked to the door of Leo's bedroom. He watched the boy sleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "True love is not about possession," Thomas whispered to the shadows. "If I love him, I must want the best for him, even if the best means he is no longer mine." The next few days were a blur of tension. The DNA technicians arrived with their sterile kits. Thomas held Leo's hand as they took a swab from inside the boy's cheek. "It's okay, Leo," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "It's just a little test." The waiting was the hardest part. Thomas walked through the town like a ghost. The whispers had returned, but this time they were different. The town knew. The news of a billionaire heir in their midst had spread like wildfire. Finally, the black sedan returned. The lawyer walked up the path with a different look in his eyes. Respect. Perhaps even a bit of awe. "The results are conclusive," Sterling said as they sat in the study. "Leo is a Sterling. He is the only biological link left to the family empire. The patriarch Leo's grandfather is on his way. He wants to meet his grandson." Thomas felt a heavy stone drop into his stomach. The inheritance was no longer a possibility. It was a reality. Sterling opened a map of the city. "We have already arranged for his enrollment in the Premier Academy of Music. He will have his own wing in the estate, private security, the best of everything." Thomas listened to the lawyer list the luxuries. He heard about the marble floors and the grand ballrooms. But he heard nothing about bedtime stories. He heard nothing about the secret hiding spot in the garden. He heard nothing about how Leo liked his toast, burnt just a little on the edges. The truth was out. The storm from the past had made landfall, and Thomas knew that his quiet life in Willow Creek would never be the same again. He went into the living room and sat at the piano. Leo came and sat beside him. "Why is that man here so much?" Grandpa Thomas pulled the boy close and kissed the top of his head. "Because you are very special, Leo, more special than you even know." He looked at the keys of the piano. He knew that soon these keys would be silent once more. The heartbreak was already beginning, a dull ache that started in his chest and spread to his soul. But he stayed strong. He stayed calm. For Leo. The sky outside turned a bruised purple as evening approached. The black car sat waiting at the curb like a silent beast. The countdown had begun. Chapter 5. A Heartbreaking Farewell. The confirmation came in a thick envelope embossed with a silver seal. The science was cold and indisputable. Leo was a Sterling. He was the flesh and blood of a dynasty that owned half the fertile valleys in the state. Then came the morning that changed the silence of Willow Creek forever. It was not just one car this time. A motorcade of 3 black SUVs cruised slowly down the narrow lane. They looked like obsidian stones moving through a field of autumn leaves. At the center of the procession was a vintage limousine. It stopped perfectly in front of the white picket fence. A chauffeur stepped out and opened the door. An elderly man emerged. He moved with a cane topped with a silver eagle. This was Arthur Sterling, the patriarch, the billionaire who had spent his life building an empire of soil and seed. But his face was a mask of granite and loneliness. Thomas met him at the gate. The two men stood in stark contrast. Thomas in his worn flannel shirt and garden-stained boots. Arthur in a wool coat that cost more than Thomas's cottage. "I have come for my grandson," Arthur said. His voice was raspy like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "He has a destiny to fulfill. He must be groomed. He must be taught how to lead." Thomas looked the billionaire in the eye. "He is a child, Mr. Sterling. He is not a piece of land to be managed." Arthur's eyes flickered toward the house. "He is the only one left. I will not let the Sterling name die in a small town. He will have the best tutors, the best schools, a future that you cannot even imagine." Thomas felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was the sound of a heart breaking in slow motion. But he knew Arthur was right about one thing. The resources of the Sterling family were limitless. Leo's talent was a flame that needed a great deal of fuel to become a sun. Thomas went inside. Leo was sitting on the rug playing with a small wooden truck Thomas had carved for him. "Leo," Thomas said softly, kneeling beside the boy. "Do you remember how we talked about your music? About how you have a special gift?" Leo nodded, his eyes wide. "Your grandfather is here," Thomas said, gesturing toward the window. "He lives in a place where the pianos are grander than this whole house. He can help you become the greatest musician in the world. You need to go with him for a while." Leo's lower lip trembled. "Are you coming too, Grandpa Thomas?" Thomas felt a lump in his throat that threatened to choke him. He swallowed hard and forced a smile. "No, Leo. I have to stay here and look after the garden. But this is your journey. You are a bird, meant for the high sky." He spent the next hour packing Leo's small suitcase. He tucked the wooden truck between the folds of the boys' sweaters. He added a small photo of the two of them at the piano. The walk to the gate felt like a mile. Thomas held Leo's hand, feeling the small, warm fingers for what he feared might be the last time. He was giving away his world, his daily dose of joy, his reason for smiling at the dawn. Arthur Sterling stood by the open door of the limousine. He did not offer a hand in gratitude. He only watched. "Be brave," Leo, Thomas whispered, leaning down to hug the boy. "Remember the music. Remember that you are free." Leo climbed into the back of the car. His small face appeared at the window, pressed against the glass. The motorcade began to move. The black tires crunched on the gravel. Thomas stood at the fence. He raised his hand in a slow wave. He watched until the black shapes became small dots. He watched until they crossed the horizon where the sky meets the road. Then they were gone. The silence hit him like a physical blow. He walked back into the cottage and closed the door. The air felt different, stagnant, cold. He walked into the kitchen. There was a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the counter. A small blue sock lay under the table. The house was full of ghosts of a life that had ended an hour ago. Thomas sat at the old upright piano. He touched the keys, but he did not play. He thought about the dust that would soon settle on the ivory. He thought about the empty chair at the dinner table. The solitude he had once enjoyed as a young retiree now felt like a prison. He was alone again. Truly alone. That night, Thomas sat on the porch in the dark. He looked at the stars. He told himself that he had done the right thing. He had fulfilled his mission. He had taken a child from a broken home and given him a foundation of love. He had protected him until his true family could find him. It was a humanitarian success. It was a noble sacrifice. But those thoughts did not stop the tears from falling. The void in his heart was vast. He realized now that Leo hadn't been a safety net for his old age. Leo had been the heart itself. Thomas went inside and looked at the legal papers one last time. The Sterling name was powerful. Leo would be famous. He would be wealthy. He would have everything. But as Thomas blew out the lamp, he wondered if anyone in that big city would know. Would they know that Leo likes his toast burnt just a little? Would they know to listen for the music in the rain? The little white cottage stood dark in the New England night. The man inside lay awake, listening to the ticking of the clock, waiting for a sound that he knew would not come. Thomas had given Leo the world, and in doing so, he had lost his own. Chapter 6. The Heart's Way Home. The first night without Leo was the longest Thomas had ever known. The cottage felt like a tomb. He had wandered from room to room, touching the empty bed, running a finger over the lid of the silent piano. He told himself the ache would fade. He told himself that time would heal the wound of his sacrifice. By the next afternoon, Thomas sat on his front porch. The sky was a pale autumn blue. The world was moving on, but his heart was stuck in the moment the limousine had turned the corner. He held a book in his lap, but his eyes were fixed on the empty driveway. Then, a low hum vibrated through the air. A familiar shape appeared at the end of the road. It was a single black SUV. It was moving much faster than the motorcade had the day before. Thomas stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. The car swerved into his driveway and screeched to a halt. The door flew open before the engine had even stopped. "Dad!" The cry ripped through the stillness of the afternoon. It was Leo. The boy tumbled out of the back seat like a ball of energy. He was still wearing his fine city clothes, but his face was stained with tears. He sprinted across the lawn. His small feet kicked up clouds of dry leaves. Thomas staggered down the porch steps. He could hardly believe his eyes. He fell to his knees on the grass, his arms wide open. Leo slammed into him with the force of a tidal wave. The boy's small arms wrapped around Thomas's neck. He held on so tight it was hard to breathe. "Don't let them take me back," Leo sobbed into Thomas's shoulder. "I don't want the big house. I don't want the big piano. I want you." Thomas buried his face in the boy's hair. He felt the warmth. He felt the heartbeat. The void in his soul was filled in an instant. The driver's side door opened. Arthur Sterling stepped out. The billionaire looked different than he had the day before. The mask of granite was gone. His shoulders were slumped. He looked like a man who had finally realized that his money had met its match. He walked toward them, stopping a few feet away. Arthur watched the old man and the boy holding each other on the grass. The tycoon sighed a long, weary sound. "He didn't sleep," Arthur said quietly. "He didn't eat." "I took him to the grand hall. I showed him a Steinway that belonged to a prince. I told him he could have anything he wanted." Arthur looked at his grandson. "He told me that a piano is just a box of wires if you aren't there to hear it. He refused to touch the keys. He cried until he couldn't breathe." The billionaire looked at Thomas. His eyes were full of a new kind of respect. "I have spent my life buying people. I have bought empires. I have bought land. But I realized last night that I cannot buy a home." Arthur stepped closer. "I see now that the music doesn't come from his fingers. It comes from the love you gave him. I can give him the world, but I cannot give him the one thing he needs to be a genius. I cannot give him you." The afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the town in shades of gold. Thomas stood up, still holding Leo's hand. "What happens now?" he asked. Arthur looked around the quiet street. He looked at the modest cottage and the sturdy oak trees. "I am a businessman," Arthur said, "and a good businessman knows when to change his strategy. I will not take him from you, but I will not let his talent go to waste either. I am going to build a music center here in Willow Creek, the finest academy on the East Coast. Leo will stay here, with you. He will have his world-class training in the morning, and he will have his burnt toast and his grandfather in the evening." Thomas felt a weight lift off his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. It was a miracle, a solution he had never dared to dream of. The billionaire turned to go back to his car, but he stopped and looked back at Leo. "I hope there is a chair for an old man at the recitals," he said with a small, rare smile. Leo let go of Thomas's hand and ran to Arthur. He gave his biological grandfather a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you," he whispered. The car pulled away, leaving the cottage in peace once more. The silence was gone. It was replaced by the sound of Leo's laughter as he chased a squirrel toward the backyard. Thomas stood in the center of his garden. He looked at the golden sunset. He thought about the long journey that had started with a pregnant girl on a cold winter night. He had given everything. He had expected nothing. He had offered his life as a gift to a child who had no one. And now the universe was handing it all back, with interest. He wasn't just a retired man anymore. He wasn't just a guardian. He was the heart of a family that blood had not made, but love had forged. Leo came running back, his face glowing in the twilight. "Can we play the piano now?" Dad Thomas smiled. He took the boy's hand and led him toward the porch. "Yes, Leo, let's make some music." As they walked inside, the first notes of a joyful melody drifted out of the open window. The song was bright. It was free. It was the sound of a heart that had found its way home. In the small town of Willow Creek, the little white cottage glowed like a beacon. It was proof that when you give love without a single thought of yourself, when you act from the purest part of your soul, the world finds a way to bring you exactly what you need. The music played on, into the night, into the future, a symphony of kindness that would never end. Thomas once taught us that true love is not about holding on, but about having the courage to let go for the sake of another. It is the quiet sacrifices we make and the kindness we sow in the hearts of children that become our greatest legacy in this world. If this story touched your heart today, please share your thoughts in the comments and join our family by subscribing for more tales of the human spirit. Your support means the world to us and helps these messages reach those who need them most. Please stay a moment longer and click the new video on your screen to continue this journey of warmth and reflection.